there's also 1 in 6 men comes from that same source, but you have to acknowledge that it also includes such minor things as a push or a slap, and indeed it might have been somebody who was just pushed or slapped just once, and that would actually go down as a statistic. So I think that the 1 in 6 men and the 1 in 4 women is actually grossly overinflated, grossly.
I don't think the 1 in 4 women have experienced domestic violence at some point in their lives is a valid figure, because apart from anything else, it was actually taken from women in refuges. There were no control groups. It isn't a proper analysis.
Does that mean that, you know, of all of your friends, a quarter of them are, you know, are being abused? And she went, well, no, I mean that over their whole lifetime, so not any given time. I said, okay, and what exactly counts as abuse under? What do you mean by abuse? Because this seems like an epidemic of what's going on. And he said, oh, well, it means, you know, obviously, you know, knifing and stabbing and stuff, and murder, obviously, punching and kicking, and then also name calling and ignoring and stuff like this. So what it actually boiled down to was that over that whole spread of things, it meant that, you know, 1 in 4 women over the course of their lives will be ignored for a period of time by their partners.
When I asked for a definition of domestic abuse, I said that I did not consider that a one-off aberration that might have happened 15 years ago, where my wife slapped me round the face because she lost her temper that day, and it had never happened before and it had never happened since. I said, I really don't put that into the same category of domestic abuse as somebody who's systematically abusing somebody else, like on a daily or a weekly basis.
Government figures published as recently as January 2000 announced that men are equally likely to be victims of domestic violence, and overall the prevalence of domestic violence is very low. 4.2% is really not very much. In light of this, why did the Scottish Government pay for a series of TV and poster adverts stating that 4.2% does not constitute a constant threat or anything like it? If the adverts were instead stating that people were under constant threat of being murdered in their beds, it would be condemned as scaremongering.
I'd often said to a man, when you hit her, who do you think was in charge? When he stopped to think about it, he'd say, once I'd hit her, she was in a powerful position, because then I would plead and beg and ask for another chance. So the perpetrator became the victim became the perpetrator. You see, it's complicated, but we never really discuss it.
With every presentation of domestic violence you'll see anywhere in the media, all we're shown is the end point of an incident. Typically this will be a picture of a bruised woman and a description of exactly how a man hurt a woman, and that's it. Finito. And this we call news. We never get to see the man. We never get to see the other guy.
Of the first 100 women that she had in the refuge, 62 of them, she said, were actually more violent or as violent as the men that put them there.
I realised it wasn't a gender issue, and I knew that from personal experience, because although both my parents were violent, dysfunctional, my mother was physically a lot more violent to me than my father. So I came to the whole subject with an open mind, and as I took the women in, I looked at the first 100 women that had came in with their children, and of the first 100, 62 could be described as violent as the partners that they left. So it never has been a gender issue, but the political problem at the time, which is something I've never been able to get out into the open, is that the feminist movement, having formed itself in late 1969-70, never got the kind of support it needed financially, because it was so extreme.
Up till then, the women, they were burning their bras and doing all sorts of silly things, making fools of themselves, and they were a joke. But then finally they hit on the topic that gave them the credibility they so badly needed, and it also gave them the funding.
I knew the moment that I started taking in women and children that it would be hijacked. They were very, very highly organised Marxist groups of women of one sort or another, and sure enough, in 1974 we called a very small conference to encourage other groups to set up refuges. They invaded it.
All they came, literally walked into the hall with all their leather gear on and all the rest of it, up on a platform, shouted and barracked. They had all their placards outside, all men are rapists, all men are bastards. She said they were quite violent women.
And began a voting system which by the end usurped our position as the national organisation. and took it over. And the tragedy was that from then onwards, these lies and false figures and statistics have been disseminated internationally through the Western world, and men have been deemed as perpetrators, not because they happen to be violent, but because they happen to be men.
Even if we did see the man, what could this tell us? Women bruise more easily than men. Basically, for the same punch or kick, a woman's face will swell up and discolour far more impressively than a man's. So that must make her the victim, right?
It's exactly the same. I mean, if a woman smacks a man in the face with a fist, he probably won't even be bruised. Majority of women are nothing like as physically strong as a man. He will be just as hurt and as abused as if he hit her. Had he hit her, she would be severely bruised. It's only a difference in physical size.
Much of what we think about domestic violence seems to be predicated on three things. Women are victims, men are perpetrators. Men are much stronger than women, and so it's always wrong for a man to hit a woman. There's never a reason for a man to hit a woman. The police choose to operate under this flawed understanding of domestic violence, and is the reason why men are put into impossible situations when women are violent. In this society of ours, where women claim that they want equality with men, we have this strange idea that men must at all times behave better than women because men are physically stronger. Women in particular seem to believe this deeply. It's as if women see themselves like children, who can do whatever they like, including being violent and aggressive towards men. But men must be like the adults in a relationship.
One of the main changes that has to come is that if we want to talk about any form of emancipation, liberation, equality for women, then there has to be equality of responsibility. And in a sense, the old patronising attitude that women have to be these women Virgin Marys on a pedestal. And in the beginning, nobody, certainly not judges, wanted to believe that a woman could have any part in a violent relationship. Men needed to see women in this virginal way, which is enormously bad for men and even worse for women. So the attitude always was, oh yes, of course she's innocent. As long as she cries and she looks pretty, then she can't be guilty of anything. And it's still the climate today, but as the feminist movement mounted its campaign to vilify men, it became easier and easier and easier within the court system, which after all was flooded with women, and the social services, which is largely women, and all the sort of feminization of our society to see men as the enemy.
In general, men don't get physical with women, for the same reason that men don't get physical with squirrels. Why would they? That's why the argument that men are stronger than women is irrelevant. Men and women simply don't relate to each other in that way. Like ships passing in the night, men don't regard women as a physical threat, and women don't seek to challenge men on a physical level.
It's what blokes are like with women. You allow women to get away with the most outrageous things that you would not allow a bloke to get away with, because it's just how you are with women, and women know that as well. True. Women can get away with blue murder.
Women are very unlikely to experience violence from a man, even when they put themselves directly in harm's way. For example, police women. The issue when a man does hit a woman is that most likely she's decided to stop behaving like a woman and instead behaves like an aggressive man.
I had a friend who was in a pub, and this woman was mouthing off at him, kind of swearing at him, and they basically weren't getting along. And she finally came up to him and punched him across the face, and without breaking stride, without even a second's hesitation, he gave her a full punch across the face that threw her backwards across the table. About 5 guys who were sitting there then got up, stormed towards this guy. We all had to kind of run out the pub. If a man did that, if a man came up doing that behaviour, he would know full well that he's going to have a fight in his hands.
And she told us this wonderful little story with a woman that had a black eye, and she said, well, why did he black your eye? She said, we're not supposed to ask that. Well, I am. She said, why did he black your eye? And she said, well, because I'd stabbed him.
Across all of media, and in our legislation, and the behaviour of the police, women have free rein to initiate violence and still be treated as the victims.
One time he actually pinned me down to the floor, and he had an axe over my head, and he said, I'm going to kill you.
It started as verbal abuse and then turned violent. Bryony put up with it for 9 months before she sought help.
Where's the story here? I thought a story had a beginning, a middle and an end. Why is it that with domestic violence we're only ever told the ending, and only a female version of the ending at that? There's no investigation or discussion into what caused this behaviour. It's like being told a punchline without being told the joke. How can this pass for news? It's human nature to ask why when violence occurs. But with domestic violence, where a woman is hurt, no one and no news story ever questions why it happened. The man is simply wrong and must be punished. This blanket prejudice is a hate crime against men. If we employed the domestic violence approach on news reporting to the Second World War, our whole understanding of the conflict might come only from studying the D-Day landings. If we looked only at that point of the war, it might seem like for no reason at all, the whole world was ganging up on one country. Poor, innocent Nazi Germany.